Reporting from Arkham Asylum, this is Gotham Rogues. In this video we take a look at the Batman the Animated Series episodes, Two-Face, Part 1 and 2. The episodes Two-Face Part 1 and 2 were written by Alan Burnett and Randy Rogel and were directed by Kevin Altieri. We had already been introduced to Harvey Dent, DA and Bruce Wayne's best friend, earlier on the show, but here we find out that he's more complex than what had been led on. In the first part we find a stressed out Harvey, dealing with a ton of responsibilities at the same time. He's campaigning to get re-elected as district attorney in an upcoming election. He's working on a major case that might crack the town's biggest crime lord, Rupert Thorne. He's planning his future with his lovely girlfriend, Grace Lamont, who's just itching to get married, and Harvey is also struggling with deep mental issues, manifesting themselves in a second, extremely violent personality. This guy just has too much on his plate. Rupert Thorne then gets a hold of Dent's psychiatric file, discovering his psychological problems, and uses the information to blackmail Harvey into laying off his case. Naturally, Dent has no chance of getting re-elected if the people of Gotham knew about his fragile mental state. However, Harvey's dark, violent side is not the type to give in to blackmail, and during an altercation between him and Thorne that takes place at a chemical factory and involves Batman, Dent is severely disfigured on the left side of his body. This acts as a catalyst that completely unleashes the evil personality within Harvey's mind, allowing it to take control. Taking on the identity of Two-Face, he flees from his old life, leaving Grace behind, and starts a crime wave in Gotham, hitting all of Thorne's gambling dens in a scheme of revenge and twisted justice. I've said this many times before and now I'm saying it again. This is the greatest Two-Face appearance outside of the comics. In my opinion, it's vastly superior to The Dark Knight, the Arkham games, and of course Batman Forever. Whenever somebody is interested in Two-Face but don't want to read comics, because let's face it, most people don't, then I do not recommend them to watch The Dark Knight. I tell them to watch these two episodes. We will get into Aaron Eckhart's Dent pretty soon, so I'll talk more about that version then. Anyway, this two-parter draws heavily from both the original Two-Face trilogy of the 1940s and the greatest Two-Face story ever told in my opinion, The Eye of the Beholder, which was incidentally published just 2 years before these episodes. I'd say that this two-parter is second only to Eye of the Beholder. Seriously, what is up with all these twos? I'm not doing it on purpose, I swear. Anyway, in both this one and Eye of the Beholder, Harvey had mental issues long before getting disfigured. That works a lot better than the old origin of a sane man who goes totally bonkers after getting burned by acid. I don't want to knock too much on the classic Two-Face though, as I love that version as well. This feels more realistic though, and I buy into it more. Where I think Eye of the Beholder is superior to TAS is the origins of Harvey's mental issues. In the comic, he was abused by his alcoholic father. He used to play a game with him. He flipped a coin to decide whether Harvey should get severely beaten or not. But the coin was of course the famous two-headed one, which Harvey was unaware of at the time, so the game was rigged and he always received a beating. In this episode, Dent was violent as a child and beat another kid so bad he had to go to the hospital. Or so Harvey thought. He actually went to the hospital due to an unrelated medical condition. Nevertheless, little Harvey was appalled at his own actions and decided to repress all of his rage, causing it to slowly build up over the years. That's a great backstory, but I feel the one from the comics is a bit better and makes more sense. This episode also completely neglects to explain the origin of the two-headed coin. That's the only real flaw I can find in this otherwise masterpiece of a cartoon. We never find out what the coin means to Harvey and why it's so important. Where did he get it from? Why was it chosen as a tool of which Harvey uses to make his decisions? None of that is explained, and the coin is really just there. Eye of the Beholder also featured a sick serial killer who escaped prosecution, which further helped to push Harvey to the dark side. However, where I think these TAS episodes are superior are in the relationships between Dent and his loved ones, namely his fiancée Grace and his best friend Bruce. Grace, or Gilda as she's usually called in the comics, barely appears in Eye of the Beholder and basically plays a nonsensical role. She could have been dropped altogether and it would have made very little difference. Here, she's a major character and Harvey's main anchor to sanity and his own normal life. It's actually a very sad love story and kind of a Beauty and the Beast type scenario. It doesn't matter how hideous he looks or how deep he's fallen into madness, Grace still loves him and wants him back. And same goes for Harvey. It doesn't matter how much Two-Face is in control and how far he's taken his criminal career, he still longs back to Grace and wants nothing more but to hold her in his arms. It's really romantic actually, and Two-Face isn't a character who we usually think of as romantic. This does stay true to the Golden Age Two-Face stories however, where Gilda also played a major role and was the sole reason Harvey Kent reformed in the third Two-Face story from 1943. So it's with the Grace character and the romantic side of Harvey where the 40s comics come into play in this two-parter. Then we have Bruce, who's portrayed as Dent's best friend. In the comics, Harvey was friends with Batman, although it was a fairly superficial friendship and more of a work-related relationship. It kinda depends on the story though. Sometimes they seem to be actual pals, and then, like in The Eye of the Beholder for instance, it's solely a professional partnership formed for the better of Gotham City. Here you get the feeling they've known each other since they were young. It's never specified, but I've always seen it as they met in college, studying law together. It would make sense for Bruce to take law classes after all. Anyway, in this two-parter, Two-Face becomes a very personal foe for Batman, as Bruce blames himself for not being able to save his friend. He also fights all the more harder to stop Two-Face, so that he can rescue what's left of Harvey Dent. We get none of that in Eye of the Beholder, as they're pretty cold towards one another in that story. Due to Harvey's relationships, Two-Face Part 1 and 2 is definitely more tragic than the comic storyline, and now I'm kinda wondering which one I do actually prefer. Nevertheless, Two-Face does not have the same deal as Mr. Freeze and the Mad Hatter, in that they were kinda crappy characters in the comics who were revitalized by the animated series. Harvey Dent was already an amazing character in the source material, and TAS managed to capture that greatness really well. It's a perfect adaptation in other words, but not necessarily an improvement, but that's all it really needed to be. It's a shame the live action films has not been able to do that. I've also gotta mention Two-Face's villain plot. One problem writers sometimes have is coming up with a good scheme for the character, but this one is perfect. He's robbing places like a villain, but it isn't the money he's really after. The true goal is to get back at Rupert Thorne, the man who ruined his life. However, it isn't solely about revenge either. Dent is also continuing his quest from his days as the DA, namely to bring down the city's biggest crime boss. Now he's just using different means to do it. That's a plot which makes a lot of sense, given the character's background and motivations. Two-Face selling drugs or just robbing random banks for the cash does not necessarily make sense. I'm kinda surprised that they still haven't used this scheme in a live-action movie yet, as it would be perfect. Just substitute Thorne with Black Mask or the Penguin and you have one awesome Batman movie. The Dark Knight Rises could have been something like that, but of course all of that is ancient history, so it's pointless to complain about. Let's just hope it eventually gets made. Two-Face was voiced by Richard Mole, a TV actor known primarily for his role on the sitcom Night Court. He does a great job in the role, and the character does have several really dramatic scenes in the two episodes, which Mole pulls off fantastically with his performance. I love that he does two distinctly different voices, one normal Harvey Dent voice and one gruff, gravelly Two-Face voice. After Harvey has become Two-Face though, Mole never goes back to the normal voice. I kinda wish that he'd done that in the scenes where Harvey seems to be in more control, like when he reunites with Grace near the end of part 2. That's really just a nitpick though. In conclusion, Two-Face Part 1 and 2 is an amazing pair of animated episodes. It's kind of hard to believe that a cartoon show from the early 90s, mainly watched by kids, covered such dark and deep subjects, such as a man struggling with mental issues and rage. The first part barely even features Two-Face or Batman, and is mainly made up of scenes where people talk. There's very little action in it. I remember being kinda bored by it, even though it was Two-Face. But hey, I was like 6 or 7 years old. Back then I loved Tommy Lee's Two-Face, so you can't hold it against me. Kids are stupid. However, when I rewatched it at the age of around 12 or 13, I was completely blown away by it. That was also the first time I realized just how shitty the Batman Forever version was in comparison, and my hatred of that depiction began. It's kinda funny that I grew up with two such vastly different versions of the character, like Day and Night, or The Godfather and Jack and Jill. So there you have it. That's the Batman the Animated Series episodes Two-Face Part 1 and 2. Next up on Batman TAS Reviews, it's finally time for the Clock King. So stay tuned for that. And as always, remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.